Hello? Honey, I'm home. Hello? Hello, gang. I'm home. Hello? Hello? Oh, hi. Hi, honey. How are you? Good. Did you get some work done? Yeah, got your note. Okay, great. See you in a couple minutes. Yeah. Okay, bye.
Well, this morning is the second in this series that we're calling Clearing the Hurdles. And this message this morning, as I mentioned earlier, is titled Desparate Housewives. And I'm sure that you kind of get the concept where we're going to go with this. And if you want to follow, I encourage you to turn in the first book of the Bible, chapter 39 in the book of Genesis, as we'll pick up the story there in just a few minutes. The idea behind this series that we're doing called Clearing the Hurdles is to help you and provide you with some practical insight from the Bible in dealing with real-life situations. Real-life situations that have the potential to trip us up. The focus of our ministry here at Flack Memorial is inviting people to join the journey of becoming fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. And then when you begin that journey and you take that step across the line of belief and begin to start this journey, then the next part of our ministry is helping you with whatever those next steps are, wherever you are in this journey, to help you develop your life from moving away from the way our culture lives in self-centered living to move to Christ-centered living. One of the hurdles that trips up a lot of people, even seasoned Christ followers, is the hurdle of sexual temptation and lust. And we're going to be pretty blunt this morning. And so our culture talks that way, and I'm not going to be graphic or anything like that. So anybody grab the kids' ears, anything like that. But we're going to look at a situation that could have been written for a Hollywood script this morning. One of those hurdles we had just mentioned that trips up a lot of people, even including people that have been on the journey of faith for a long time, is this hurdle of sexual temptation and lust. I was talking to a friend of mine this week, and he told me something that just about took my breath away. I'm not kidding. He told me that he had been in a meeting with some leaders of our nation's major denominations. And he told me this. He said one of the leaders of one of our major church evangelical denominations in this country that have churches, large number of churches, told them in this meeting that he had had more resignations in the month of August from pastors because of moral failure than all of the church fellowship that we belong to, than all the pastors that we have. Now, friends, that's tragic. And the one thing that I have observed about this particular hurdle, and I have observed it up close and personal, has been when someone trips over this hurdle and they don't clear this hurdle, what I can tell you is what I've observed is this. they're not the only one that's going down. And we do well to remember what I talked about last week. That track coaches will tell you in running the hurdles, it's so important that those steps that you take just before you reach the hurdle are significantly important as how you, if you clear the hurdle, and how the rest of your performance is in the race. What the truth is that there's a lot of people that thought they would never ever have problems clearing this hurdle in life. And the tragedy is that a lot of people who thought they'd never have any trouble clearing this hurdle have found themselves laid out in the fast lane of life, branded for the rest of their life. There's a little verse tucked away that Paul writes to the Corinthian believers in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. And he says this, he says, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. And if you look at that real close, go to the next slide. Notice between standing firm and don't fall what the words are. Be careful. Many of us remember the horrible devastation that the city of New Orleans experienced during Hurricane Katrina. And so much of that devastation occurred because people ignored repeated warnings about the integrity of the levees that contained the Mississippi River, that they were never ever going to be able to withstand a storm of that kind of force. Several years ago, Discipleship Journal asked its readers to respond to a survey about those areas in their lives that presented them with the most challenges. Those temptations they struggled with, and they noted that the temptations they struggled with were most potent when they had neglected their time with God and when they were physically tired. And they noted that they found their greatest triumphs in resisting temptations when they had spent more time in prayer and avoiding compromising situations and spending time in the Word of God on a daily basis, but also being accountable to someone. Because when you think about it, the idea that there's a lot of people thought they would never ever have trouble clearing some certain hurdles in life. Thomas Watson writes these words. He says, who would have ever thought to have found adultery in David, or drunkenness in Noah, or cursing in Job? If God leaves a man to himself, how suddenly and scandalously may sin break forth in the holiest man on earth. Some of us familiar with those words of Paul in Ephesians 6. He talks about putting on the whole armor of God. I kind of like the way it reads in the translation, the Message. He says, be prepared. You're up against far more than you can handle on your own. Anybody ever read about how Eskimos have used to trap wolves? Anybody ever heard about that? It's kind of gruesome, but let me tell you about that. They would take their knives and they would coat them with animal blood and then let it freeze on it. And then they would add another layer of blood and freeze it. Then they would add another layer of blood and freeze it. And then they take their knife out, blade up, and stick it down in the ground. And those wolves, following their sensitive nose to the source of this fresh, frozen blood, they would find it and they would begin to lick